Hi guys, so I'm here to talk to you today about female characters in apocalyptic and dystopian fiction, as well as their film adaptations, and what I in particular like and expect from these genres. This video is a sponsored video. It is sponsored by Sony Pictures Home Entertainment, who are working together with Penguin Random House to promote the release of the fifth wave film adaptation in DVD. So when the people at Sony got in contact with me, I was intrigued because I'd heard great things about The Fifth Wave, which is an apocalyptic young adult novel which predominantly follows a female lead during an alien invasion of Earth. I read the book and watched the film adaptation to see what I thought, and I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed both the novel and the film adaptation, although I may not be as big a fan as my mum because I watched the film with her and I swear it's her new favourite film. So this video will include a review of and my thoughts on the book and the film adaptation. All opinions are, however, my own, but just to make sure you're aware. So for me personally, what makes a good dystopian or apocalyptic story isn't that it makes us fear the future or that it makes us grateful for the present, but that it highlights parallels in our contemporary society which are not that far off or virtually exactly the same as the things that are going on in this dystopian apocalyptic story. They might not be happening to us, or they might not be happening to us to quite the extent they're happening in these stories, but they're happening to other people across the world, or they're happening to people down the street from us. And I think in that respect, a good dystopian or apocalyptic novel which shows society at its lowest and degrading every day can actually help us better understand the society we live in and the issues that face different groups of people. So that's why I think it's really important to have women and young women represented in this genre. I think the worlds of science fiction and fantasy, where you could easily put a lot of apocalyptic and dystopian fiction, are traditionally associated with men. That idea of the last man at the end of the world is quite a traditional one, and I personally am really glad to see the kind of rise of the young female lead in apocalyptic and dystopian fiction. I mean, most of us have seen or read The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins, which features a female lead named Katniss in a dystopian society where the underprivileged classes are pitted against one another in an annual fight to the death for the entertainment of the rich. And it actually deals with really important issues like PTSD and demonstrates what I think is one of the most important factors when creating a strong female lead, which is to avoid the glorification of violence and depict complex emotions within the character. One of my favourite dystopian post-apocalyptic works is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which also has a film adaptation. And one of my favourite things about this story is that the female protagonist, Offred, isn't a super heroic, stay positive, out to save the world character. She has been deeply affected by this world, which simplifies women's roles into society to the most basic stereotypes. They are either wives, baby incubators, or sexual objects. They have virtually no rights and aren't even allowed to read. And for me, The Fifth Wave ticked a lot of these boxes. The Fifth Wave follows our protagonist Cassie, who's a 16-year-old American high school student when the apocalypse begins. It starts with a strange spacecraft hovering over the Earth without sending any communication down whilst the humans wait. After 10 days of waiting, the first wave hits, and each wave brings with it a new devastation to the planet which kills off more human beings.
Here's how you kill off a species. First, you take out the easy ones, the weak, the exposed. Kill them as efficiently as possible. That was the first 3 waves. But even if you bug bomb the house, there's always a few cockroaches left. Now we are like those cockroaches, and the others picking us off, one by one. And because the others look like us, we can't trust anyone.
Cassie goes from being your typical high school student, confiding in her best friend, and dealing with sexual attraction to, in her case, boys. Experiences I am sure are not unheard of to many of us. I think it's really important to establish the normality of Cassie's life and create an experience in her background that's really relatable to most of the readers or viewers, because when these terrible things start to happen to her, she's still the same person. She's still that girl whose priorities only a few days ago were classes, friends, and boys. And suddenly she has to deal with being a refugee. This was definitely one of my favourite bits about the book and the film, and I think it was particularly well depicted in the film because it was so visual and you saw the hardship they went through, and it marked a real changing point in Cassie's life. Suddenly she'd lost loved ones, had to leave her home, were struggling to find food and shelter, and were chucked in with a bunch of strange people, desperately in need of aid but not sure who to trust. And throughout history and at this very moment in time, there are young girls whose previous priorities were exactly the same as Cassie's, having to flee their country because of violence and find shelter in new and unfamiliar lands. So that was one of the themes of the story that really struck me. This is definitely a book that works very well in film. It really brings it to life for me in big ways and in small ways. Cassie is played by Chloe Grace Moretz in this film adaptation, who's an actress I'm a big fan of. I really like her in film and out of film. I think she's pretty awesome, and I think she did a really good job of portraying Cassie's character on film. And one of the most important things I mentioned before was capturing that complex emotion which creates a complex character and a realistic character, and at the end of the day is the only strong female character I'm interested in, because she's the strong female character that represents all of us. In the opening scene of the movie and one of the very first scenes in the book, we see Cassie shooting an unarmed man out of fear that he has a weapon. And I think this scene and its aftermath and its effect on Cassie really captures what I was saying earlier about not glorifying violence in these situations. Violence and potentially killing other human beings doesn't equal strength, and I think that's an important distinction to make. I think on one hand it's really important to depict women being as physically capable as men in these situations and not having to rely on men constantly. And in situations where men do come to the aid of the women in these situations, it isn't because they're women and they're incapable. They're shown in other moments to, when given the chance, be capable of saving themselves and in some cases doing regrettable and potentially horrific things. But at the same time, it's really important not to just brush those things off as easy peasy actions that don't affect the character mentally. And I'm really glad that throughout the fifth wave, Cassie lost hope, regained hope, struggled, wanted to give up. And although she's the protagonist, her goal from the offset of the book isn't to save the world. Her priority is her family, and in particular her little brother. She holds on to that one remaining grain of hope in order to power through her fear, but that fear is always there. One of the things I really liked in the book that wasn't in the film, but is in fact quite a small incident and doesn't really carry the plot forward, but just as an observation on women at the end of the world, really struck me. And that was when Cassie is in a refugee camp, there's a moment where, although the incident never becomes sexual assault, there is this threat in the air and this sense that a young girl in this situation where the world is falling apart, there are those that might take this opportunity to become sexually aggressive. And although it wasn't a major part of the plot, I'm glad that the book touched on that, because sexual violence is already so prolific in our society as it is. I think to acknowledge that as an issue that would probably arise in these situations is actually really important. And like I said, what I really appreciate from an apocalyptic or dystopian novel is its parallels to contemporary society. On the other end of the spectrum, however, one thing I really liked in the film, as it sort of built on the book, was the depiction of the romance in the story. The romance is undeniably a little bit cheesy. If you think I have a problem with cheesy, then you've completely mismarked me as a person. I love me some cheese. Why I particularly liked it in the film was that I felt like the film kind of embraced the cheese. It acknowledged the humour and almost the mundaneness in still wanting to have sex in the middle of the apocalypse. I like that Chloe Grace Moretz's acting in the film almost just sort of smiled and shrugged, and for me broke that fourth wall and acknowledged to the viewer that, yeah, this is a little bit cheesy, but don't you love it? And one of the other things I really liked about the romance, particularly in the film, was that in the film, although Cassie isn't particularly experienced in romance and acknowledges how kind of awkward her feelings can be in the situation she's in, Chloe Grace Moretz's depiction of Cassie's feelings kind of broke down that stereotype for me of women having to wait for the first move, and I really appreciated in the film that when kissing and sexual activity are on the table, it's Chloe Grace Moretz's character who puts them there. She's the instigator of anything physical, and you know what, I really appreciated that. If a strong female character is someone that feels complex emotions, then Chloe Grace Moretz captured that hubbub of various different feelings going on in a young woman's head, and all of those things are just kind of put into hyper focus in the middle of the apocalypse. She was already in the process of growing up, and that's just been sort of fast forwarded for her because she's been forced into this difficult situation, but at the same time she's still the 16-year-old girl who's starting to feel sexual attraction and wants to act on that, who also loves and misses her family and wants them to take care of her. And although the background to all of these feelings has changed somewhat from high school, she's still processing and exploring all of these feelings. There's probably a lot more I could say about the fifth wave if we're here. I certainly think there's more to be said about the themes of othering and turning people against one another, but I think I'll end the video here, or else you'll never get on with your day. I hope you enjoyed this little discussion. I know I enjoyed kind of figuring out all my feelings and exploring the themes in this book and its movie adaptation. But if you did miss this film when it was in the cinema, then you might want to get your hands on the DVD. And if you're like me and don't really care about reading books before seeing the films, and in fact often find if you enjoy a film you're more likely to read the book, then I wouldn't worry too much if you haven't read the book, because I watched the film first and still enjoyed the book afterwards, which is actually the same as what I did for The Hunger Games. But since I've got a little while to wait for the sequels to the film, I think I'm going to go and read the sequels to the book instead and find out what happens. Until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!